Okay, good morning, everybody. We're on Hemshech Ayin Beis, page 1150. Okay, good morning, everybody. We're on Hemshech Ayin Beis, page 1150. And I'll just give you a background how we got here, because we have been learning Tzadik Daled, which is the parallel, the Frierdiker Rebbe's discourse from 1933. So let's first sum up what we learned, and then we'll weave it back to where we are. So we've been discussing, the general theme has been the Ayin Be'emtza. The headline would be Ayin Be'emtza, the channel, the divine channel of energy between, that's the interface between Yesh Amiti, which is the creator, the true and absolute reality of Atzmus, and Yesh HaNivra, which is the created reality of our existence. And in between there's an ayin, a channel. Just the word I use. It's not really the word he uses, just to visualize it. And that's basically Oyer. Oyer Ein Sof. That ayin in turn divides into two. The ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. So they're one entity. It's one ayin, one level of Oyer, but it divides into two levels, two dimensions. One that represents and reflects the source, and one that relates and engages with the creation. So one that reflects the producer, and one that relates to the product. So if the artist would be the creator and the art would be the product, this would be the channel in between that is connecting the artist, the artistic creative energy flowing, and relating to, obviously, the canvas of the creation of the art. And any other example you want, whether it's a teacher-student example or other examples, are all appropriate in trying to understand this. Okay. In this itself, we learned three approaches. The Frierdiker Rebbe calls it three shittas. Shitta, an approach, three approaches of how to explain this ayin and its two levels. Approach number one is that it's all before the tzimtzum. That before the tzimtzum, Atzmus emanated a type of divine conscious energy that filled everything. There's no tzimtzum, nothing else exists. But at least it's now become a mitzias nimtza of some divine state of energy. We can't fully understand it. We can talk about it. But basically the examples would be within the artist itself, the artist is beginning to relate to what he wants to achieve. But the early stages is the ayin amiti, is etzem ha'er. All it is just a wish to manifest. Then there's this pashtus seir, is its extension that begins to take on some envisioning of shape and form, details, but all within the Fnei Tzimtzum. So there you have the ayin of Yesh HaMiti, is the etzem ha'er, the core energy, that is not even manifest in any way. All it is a reflection of Atzmus. And the manifest energy as it extends and expresses, and the Ratzon begins to emerge, a desire with details, envisioning, allocating resources. We spoke about three levels, and that itself had levels. The first level, Ratzon HaKlali, had, if you remember, Heskem, Shakavatari, and Achlota. That was a consideration, a deliberation, and a determination. Then next level, Ratzon HaPrati, where details begin to emerge and it's actually being drawn. It's not just a theoretical desire that can remain dormant. And the third level is Ratzon HaKodum, that you begin to actually envision and allocate resources to the details of what will be later the creation. Interpretation, then after that would follow the Tzimtzum, and the rest is history. The second interpretation is that the two levels of ayin is sovev and mamala, transcendence and immanence. Transcendent energy rooted before the tzimtzum because it's beyond sovev kalam, beyond existence. But clearly, it's not the same level like etzem ha'er in the first interpretation. It's already now sovev. And the second is mamala, which is primarily emerges, not completely emerges after the tzimtzum. But even after the tzimtzum, seviv still retains a pre-tzimtzum state of being beyond existence. That's interpretation number 2. And interpretation number 3 is everything is a mamala. Everything is an er pnimi. In the er pnimi after the tzimtzum, or general, in the er pnimi, in the imminent energy, there's the level that is the ayin of the yesh amiti, relates more to the source, and a level that relates more to the existence. So first he explained it, in this itself he explained 2 ways. One, that is the beginning of the kav and the extension of the kav. So the top of the kav is attached to and connected to its source. The extension of the kav goes downward in its hierarchy and relates to existence. And then he said, on deeper level, on a higher level, Panimi in general has etzem and ispashtus, just like the first interpretation of etzem and ispashtus, also in er Panimi, there's etzem and ispashtus. And there, also called Panimi Sa'er and Chitzeni Sa'er, the inner and outer dimension. That leads us to what we've been learning in the last few weeks, or how long, I don't remember already. At least 2 weeks, I think. And that is that Hispashtus, Pnimis and Chitzeni Sa'er, the Frierdiker Rebbe in Sadik Dalet explains it with the understanding of Pnimis and Chitzenis of Kalim, of containers. Understanding the inner and outer of a container. The inner is focused on the oil that it's receiving. The outer is focused on function and hashpah, influencing outside of the keli. That he compared also to the 2 types of names. Shem HaToyer, descriptive name, and the other, which describes the essential entity and its state of being. And then there are names that describe more the function or the impact or the state it's in, which he called Shem HaKinui or Shem HaPu'ula. Okay, which we'll talk about what it is right now, not what it's capable of, not what it's made of, not what it's wired as its natural state. And with that, the Frierdiker Rebbe concluded and brought it back to this topic. And that's the 2 levels of ayin. Now, if it's that way in Kalim, how much more so Mekolshkein and Oyer, that you have 2 dimensions. So even though Keli in general is Metzias, is some type of identity, and Oyer is Muhus, more Mahu, what is it? It's quality. Like basically, Keli is more like quantity and Oyer is more like quality. I don't mean quantity, let's say a number. I mean in definition, in shape, and form. Yet each one has the other. There's Mahus Metzias, there's Metzias and Mahus. So the Oyer, if the Keli has 2 levels of Pnimis and Chitzenis, how much more so the Oyer? And those are the 2 levels of ayin in the second explanation in the 3rd interpretation. And that's where we're at. So we finished on page 112 in Sadik Dalet in the last class. Want to just make sure. Yeah. Actually, yeah, the top of 112. Good. And now, as I said then, we're going to go back to Ayin Beis. So if you go to Ayin Beis, we're going to read now Ayin Beis back to 1150, our original journey in Ayin Beis. And everything we've been learning was to help understand the Ayin Beis. Good. Like we have the rare opportunity to have the Frierdiker Rebbe himself use Ayin Beis and teach it to us. So that's why, of course, we grabbed that opportunity by learning the Tzadik Dal, just to explain why we're going back, doing 2 Maimorim, so to speak, back and forth. So we're going to do, it's the same, we're going to do now the next section of this subject in Ayin Beis, and then we'll go back to see how the Frierdiker Rebbe discusses and explains it. At some point, as I mentioned, that Frierdiker Rebbe does not continue endlessly. That will come to a conclusion, and then Ayin Beis will be back on the Highway 72. Ayin Beis, that's okay. So the last thing we learned in Ayin Beis, just for the flow, is the same thing with Sadik Dalet, with a little more detail actually. But if you look at the last lines at the end of the paragraph, at the bottom of page Aleph Kuf Nun, 1150. Those that don't have, if you want to follow the text, you go to Chassidus Applied. ayinbeis.com. And you'll see there, just click on it, you'll see actual images, PDF images of these pages. So this is Aleph Kuf Nun in Hebrew 1150. So the last thing we learn is what I just said. The two levels of ayin in Pnimi, which he called Etzem and Ispashas, but then he called it Pnimius and Chetzenius Ha'er. So the whole Tzadik Dal that we learned, the 3 pages we learned the last while, have been explaining the bottom of this page, 1150. Just if you want me to point it out, I'll point it out to you. If you look, he says, look at 5 lines from the end of the paragraph. Ubeis madregas elu. I'm going to read from there. Ubeis madregas elu. These 2 levels in light, in Pnimi, what he called Etzem Ha'er and Hispashtus Ha'er. So there's the Pnimi that relates to the core source, and there's the Pnimi as it relates to existence. He says these 2 levels, Hu inyan Pnimi Ha'er, the Chetzenius Ha'er. And that's the whole 3 pages of Tzadik Dal just on that one line. What does that mean? And that's why he brought Pnimis and Chetzenius, the inner and outer of Kalim, and the 2 levels of names, etc. V'zeu beis b'chinas ayin. And then the Frierdiker Rebbe goes back to the word v'zeu beis b'chinas ayin. So 3 pages essentially would fit right in here, explaining it. And then concludes, and these are the 2 levels of ayin. The etzem ha'er u'b'chinas ayin shel yesh amiti. The core light and energy is the ayin of the source of the yesh amiti, the creator. The Chetzenius Ha'er, and the outer dimension of light, hu b'chinas ayin shel yesh hamisava. That's the ayin of the created yesh. Now, this parenthesis the Frierdiker Rebbe did not cite, but I'll just read it quickly. We read it already. When you break it down even more detail, more specifically, even the outer dimension of it, it also has 2 levels. The higher level of the external energy is beyond being a source for the created yesh. It's only the latter, the lower levels of the outer energy that become a source for the yesh anivra. And then he adds, as shall be explained. So clearly the topic has more to say. And with this, we move now into the next section. If anybody wants to ask anything to clarify what I've just reviewed, by all means. And then I'm going to learn inside from the bottom of this page here, 1150. Okay, good. Okay. So with that, we go. V'hinei beis b'chinas ayin hanal. So we've been using this word ayin for a few months now. And some of you have asked, and I've pointed out, what does ayin mean? He's now going to actually explain ayin. Till now, he didn't really explain it. He just used the word. Now we know ayin some interpret as nothingness, nullification. Yesh is something, ayin is nothing. But we know it doesn't mean nothing as in nothing. It means it's not a yesh. So it's not a definable identity. So what exactly is ayin mean? So we talked about this, and we're going to learn now inside. There's 2 actual different ways of explaining what ayin means. And is the ayin of the yesh amiti, does it mean the same thing as the ayin of the yesh hanivra? So till now, I've been explaining it's oir. It's a channel of light that basically God uses to create. The higher levels relate more to the creator, reflecting God's creative energy and God's wishes. And the lower level relating to existence. So it'd be like in any creation, you have these 2 levels. So till now, ayin has been identified as oir. Oir, we've spoke about, doesn't have substance. Oir doesn't have any identity of its own. All it is a reflection of the source. But what does the word ayin mean? So we're going to talk now about the word ayin itself. Just to add one more point, Chassidus asked the question. We say yesh ma'ayin. So Chassidus says, what does that mean? Yesh ma'ayin. We're going to talk about it. We're going to learn it inside as well. Yesh ma'ayin, something from nothing. What there was nothing that existed before. Isn't the real yesh above, and we're ayin? Why is it called yesh ma'ayin? So there, ayin would be like the mysterious ayin, an unknown, an unfathomable state. So it doesn't mean ayin as in that we are real and that's nothing. Obviously, that's not what it means. But just if you've learned this idea, you'll see this is all going to now come to blossom. So he says, "V'hinei beis b'chinas ayin hanal." And it seems to me that he's talking about all three interpretations. Maybe not, but I think so. What is ayin? So he says, these two levels of ayin that we're discussing, it definitely is talking about the ayin as we just spoke about pnimi. That's for sure, because that's where it's following. But I believe it's talking about ayin in general, the two levels of ayin. Hagam shenikra ayin b'chlal, even though we called it in general ayin, we said yesh, ayin, yesh, right? Yesh, amiti, yesh, anivra, ayin in between. So even though in general it's called ayin, ein perushe shava, legabe amashpia, kumay legabe amakabel. The meaning of ayin, however, is not similar when compared to from the point of view of the mashpia and from the perspective of the makabel, from the transmitter to the recipient. So though it's the same, it's in general the same level of ayin, but its meaning is a different meaning if you ask if from the perspective of the producer and from the perspective of the product. Or mashpia makabel is the right word, really. Transmitter and recipient. Shehem beis b'chinas yesh hanal. The mashpia makabel are the two levels of yesh. So there's the yesh here, yesh amiti, yesh anivra, ayin in between. So even though it's the ayin is a general name that we use for that in between, he's saying the ayin, as seen from the eyes of the yesh amiti, is different than the way ayin is seen, not seen. The meaning of ayin from the eyes of the yesh amiti are different than the meaning of ayin from the eyes of the yesh anivra. So the beis b'chinas yesh is referring to mashpia makabel. Now he's going to explain. So what's the difference? He says the yesh amiti hu mashpia. Oh no, he's explaining. What I just said, mashpia. The yesh amiti is the mashpia, the creator, the true reality, the true absolute reality of Asmus is the creator. Shemashpia hakel. He's mashpia everything. Everything transmitted into existence. Everything that is there comes from yesh amiti. K'moshe kosav ki mimcha hakel. Because everything comes from you, mimcha. So hakel comes from mimcha. Just proof to say everything comes from the source. The yesh hanivra hu hamakabel. And the created yesh is the recipient, the one that's receiving this creative energy that is creating it. Okay. But he still hasn't explained the difference between the meaning of ayin. So comes a parenthesis, just a qualification of this, what we just said, mashpia makabel. So let's read the parentheses. The parentheses carries us into page 1151. So we're making slow progress in the page numbers. So he says in the parentheses like this, Uma sheyesh amitu mashpia hakel. He's qualifying when we say that the yesh amiti is mashpia hakel, which means he's mashpia everything. He's mashpia everything comes from his transmission. He wants to qualify not that we think that that's his identity. Ein zeshu b'chinas mokir. That does not mean that he's in a state of a source. Obviously, he's the source of everything. But you can't define him like when you say, let's say, water comes from a brook, or a river comes from a spring, or Bina comes from Chochmah, or anything derived from another place. So there you say it's mashpia, but it's also a mocker. It's a defined mocker. As we learned earlier, even though Atzmus, everything comes from Atzmus, but he's not a definable source. We don't call him Ma'ir. The sun is a mocker. It's a mocker to Oir. So let me just explain. The word mocker has two meanings. The concept that he's the source of everything, obviously, Mimcha Hakel, we just said. But he's not a definable source where you can say there's a relationship between something in common. The sun, as much as it's powerful, it still has a relationship with the light. It's the source of light. And the sun is absolutely a moyer. It was created. On the fourth day, God said, Yishnei me'eres hagdelim l'hoyer ala haaretz. Created two luminaries, the sun and the moon, to radiate the earth. That's its purpose. So it's a mokir, and it's a mashpia to everything outside of it. When you say the Eibishter creates, you can't call him a moir. You can't call him a source, a luminary. Why? Like he says, ki hu muvdal be'erech, because he's infinitely removed. Ve'ena begeder hashpa. He's not in the gedder. He's not in that realm of mashpa. A teacher is a mashpia to a student. That's his gedder. They both have something in common. It's true. The teacher is far greater and higher than the student. But to say they're infinitely apart, no. So when you say the word mashpia or mokir on atzmus, on yesh amiti, you need to qualify that it doesn't mean mashpia and mokir like we mean it in ishtalshlus and in existence. Rak shememenu nimtza hakol. Everything is found from him. In other words, everything emerges from him. Like it says elsewhere. That's why it's called Tchila, the beginning. God. Because he's the beginning of everything, but not the beginning, like let's say if I said the beginning of a journey. So the beginning of the journey, the beginning and the middle and the end are all part of the same journey. Or I say the beginning of a table and the end of a table. Or Rosh Hashanah, we call Rosh Hashanah the beginning of the year. Tchilas Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah. So it's the beginning of a year. It's part of the year. To say God is the beginning of everything, you can't call him a beginning as in a piece of the whole pie, and he's the beginning of it. But rather you say everything emerges from him. Everything comes from him. Not that he's the beginning of it, meaning that there's no relationship between him and the rest of what he's creating. Like the Rambam writes right in the beginning, that from the true existence, all other existence emerged, or I don't say the word emerged is not the right word. Nimtza came into being from the true being, meaning Atzmus. So this qualification, of course, is vital, and we learned it a number of times, but he's bringing it because when you read it, if you didn't have the parentheses, you can make the mistake and think, oh, 1 second, there's a relationship here. So that's the main qualification. Now, remember, the Eibishter then chose to manifest himself in things that will be called a mocker. We do say, for example, Atzilus is a mocker to Bria, and we say the Kav is a mocker for Ishtalshlus, and Erein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum is a mocker for the lower levels. If you remember Rotzen is a mocker, but there are states where you can't call it a mocker because it's beyond, and then the levels that are more commensurate that you can say is the beginnings of some relationship between two entities. But the point is, because if we want a relationship with Atzmus, we need to know that he's completely beyond. If we only had a relationship with the levels that are related to us, it wouldn't be with Atzmus, it would be with lower levels. So of course you can relate to the Eibishter as he relates to us on a lower level. But if you want to go all the way up, you must have this qualification. Is that clear? Okay. Now he's going to explain the difference between how Ayin is seen from the perspective of the Yesh Amiti, or I should say what Ayin means, the different meanings of Ayin, the two different meanings. The Legabe Yesh Amiti, we talk about from the perspective, or Legabe, in relation to the Yesh Amiti, or from the perspective of the Yesh Amiti, Hapirish Ayin, the meaning of the word Ayin means She'ena Tefes Mokum Klal. When you say Ayin, you're saying it has no value at all. It doesn't have any standing. That this entity is called Ayin. It's nothing because it's completely nullified. from the perspective of the Yesh Hamiti. We'll explain it more with examples, but I want to first read what he says, and then we'll understand. The Gam Etzem Ha'er. Remember Etzem Ha'er? We said Etzem Ha'er is the highest level because it has no other function except reflecting Atzmos. Doesn't even relate to anything. It's not even, he said, it's not even Amshach of a Gilui. He says, the Gam Etzem Ha'er ain't a Tofis Malkum Klal Gaba Atzmos. Even the highest level of core energy. It's not, he says klal now. It completely has no value. It completely has no standing. Tefus Malkum literally means that it has some standing. It has some, Tefus Malkum means it has some value, something. Not at all compared to Atzmos. So from the point of view of Etzem has nothing but Atzmos. But from the point of view of Atzmos, Etzem is like nothing and nothing. Completely nullified. Because all it is Oir. It's a reflection. That's all it is. V'lo atzmi, and it's not the core essence. It reflects the core essence, and it has no other agenda and no other identity. But it's not the essence. There's one God, and the Oir is not Tefes Malkum Klal Klal. Harihu rak ha'or levad. It's only a reflection alone. She'ena muhuz dover ba'atzmei. It doesn't have any muhuz dover ba'atzmei. It doesn't have any of its own personality. And it has absolutely no value. Or I would say it doesn't have any standing or value. That's Etzem. How about now we say V'chein gam b'chinas hispashtus ha'or. He adds on the bottom that they're missing the word Oir. Because remember, there's the Etzem and hispashtus, the two levels. So the same with hispashtus, the extension of light. In other words, as light and energy begins to relate to a function or some purpose, ain't a toughest malkum klal legaba atzmos. Does not tefus malkum klal, has no standing, has no significance compared to atzmos. Now I know you could ask the immediate question: what do you mean it has no significance? Didn't God want it? By wanting it, He gave it significance. But think about those words. In other words, its significance is only because atzmos gave it significance, not because it has significance of its own. That's an important qualification. So of course, yes, He wants it. That's why it's there. It didn't come on its own. But it's only there because Atzmos wants it there. So therefore, it has significance. But it doesn't have significance because it has its own value. So that way, that's why it's called Ayin, as he's going to say shortly. Ulechein. Now he's going to continue further. Ulechein. Ani Hashem le'shanisi. That's why we say, I, God, don't change. There's no change, because anything, the Oir that came from me doesn't affect me in any way. There's no change at all from before, I don't say creation, from before things came into being and after things came into being. So the Rebbe Rashab is now going to explain, what does that mean? How could you say such a thing? If God wanted something and now it's there, what does it mean that there was no change? So he says, well, yifla. Seemingly it's wondrous, seemingly it's bizarre, or it's odd. I mean, yifla has a lot of meanings. Yifla means here it's something is strange, or as I said, wondrous. What is this? It's a question. Isn't it a fact that the emanations emanated? I'm sorry. Isn't it a fact that He emanated emanations and created creations, both Atzilus and Nivraim? So how is it there was no change? This is real things happened here. He emanated emanations, Atzilus created creations. So what it means, Leishanisi? There was no change. The answer to this is the fishakol mashanetzal v'nisave hakol hum ha'ora levad. Everything that was created, everything that was emanated and created and came into being, everything came from only a reflection. She'ena tefeses mokim klal legabe ha'atzmus. That does not have any standing, it does not have any significance. in comparison to Atzmus. Again, we're not talking about significance that God gives it. We're talking about significance of its own. And that's why in truth there's no shinui. Now we need to understand what this means exactly. What does this mean? What was the question and what was the answer? I mean, like what? It's semantics. First he said that the creation happened, then that Tzolim happened, and asked why nothing changed. His answer is because all that happened in the reflection, and the reflection doesn't have any standing legaba atzmus. So therefore, any changes are happening in the reflection, not in the source. That's essentially what he just said. How do you explain that? Now, this is not, I'm sure, the first time you've learned this. It's a concept that's pretty common in Chassidus, which is why we give the example of Ur. That's the rate, because Ur is a perfect example of something that does not impact its source. In other words, when, let's say, the sunlight shines to earth, and the sun is shining on a plant, and it makes the plant grow, or it's warming somebody who's outside in the heat, or the sun came to heal Avram Avinu. Is the sun impacted at all by all that? No. These effects are happening. The sunlight is affecting things. The sunlight is not affected, and neither is the sun. So this is an example that something can have an impact, but it does not have an impact back. It's not reciprocal. It only goes one way. When you, for example, a teacher and a student, you can't call it Ur. You call it Shefa. Why? Because the student is impacted by the teacher, and the teacher is impacted by the student. The teacher has to invest energy. The student may have a question. The teacher is not like a sun giving off light, oblivious to the recipient. There's a relationship. However, Ur doesn't work that way. Ur is essentially a aloof, detached force, and there's no shinu in it. In addition, we say Ur doesn't have to be mistiageya. There's no effort. The sun doesn't get tired from giving off light. A teacher teaching can't teach forever. He's going to be, it expends his energy. It's going to affect him. So all this Chassidus uses Ur to explain how something can be done and it does not affect the thing that is doing it, which confirms, therefore, the pasuk on Yeshem Leishanis. Now, to be very honest, I remember learning this the first times. I asked my mashpirim, I said, and if you say there is a shinui in Hashem, what's the big thing? If he wants to change, he changes. He's not changing like we change. Human beings change because we're limited mortal creatures. One day you're in a good mood, you're in a bad mood. You're hungry, you're not hungry. We need things. So we change according to the needs and our relationships. Atzmus doesn't change because he's not needing of anything, but he could choose to create. What's the big thing to say that there's a shinui in the Eibishter? God forbid. So of course there's the pasuk, fine. But the pasuk you could explain, it means that it doesn't change. It means that the bottom line, the pasuk says, Ani Hashem le'shanisi, b'nei Yisrael le'chalisam. I, God, don't change, and the children of Israel, le'chalisam, will never be destroyed. So essentially God is nitzchi. But what's wrong with shinui? So I got different answers. Basically, the ultimate answer is because an atzmi is not subject to shifts. It has everything in it. The idea of saying that something happens to something means it's either not complete or it's missing something. So therefore, the shinui that's the shift. When you want to say atzmus doesn't change, you want to really say that atzmus is beyond any of our understanding of shifts and changes and fluctuations. If Ein Sof is pashut, atzmus is even beyond pashut. Again, we're not talking about kol yochel. We're talking about as much as we can understand. So the idea of loy shinui, of loy shanisi, is really indicating something that is such an all-encompassing, an all-complete entity that yes, he could want to create, but the creation is not going to have a direct influence or impact on Atzmus because Atzmus is not subject to impact, basically. Now, of course, you could say, what do you mean? What don't we hear that the Eibishter has nachas when we do Torah mitzvahs, and Atzmus as a desavadir b'tachtenim, and he has pleasure from it. So what does all that mean? It's a good question. We actually learned about it earlier in volume 2, about nachas ruach lefonai, if Avodah Tzedek Geveya, if our Avodah impacts Atzmus. And the end answer was that it impacts only because God wants it to impact, not because it impacts really. Because there's a level, you could say God is beyond everything. But he chose, I could even refer to you which page if you want to see this subject matter. It's the Maimer of Vayikra. Vayikra Ayin Hey. I'm mentioning it only because it right away jumps up when we start talking about the subject, right before Pesach. I want to see the Lashon myself for a moment. Actually, the Maimer Leitia Mishakela, you know, the famous Leitia Mishakela that the Rebbe said in Ayin Beis, 1952, Mishpatim, Shabbos, is based on Vayikra and Tzav Ayin Hey. So let me just see. Actually, I think the answer, what I was referring to is in Tzav. Let me just see a second. Yeah, here. I'm looking at page 5, not 5, sorry. 8. 924. Taf Taf Kuf Chav Dalet. I'm just looking for the right line. I'll tell you where I. Yeah, look at the bottom of page 923, the page before, and then carries over to 924. So if you look, he says there, that on one hand he says it's not negeya the aveda to atzmus. On the other hand, he says it is negeya. So he says the ima yesha kavona primius va'atzmus sheyi aveda mekom makom ena nitfus bezeh. The word nitfus, I think we spoke about nitfus. Nitfus means that God is not defined by it. So essentially he wants it, but it does not define by it. So for example, by us, when we want something, when we relate to something, we're defined by it. Like we said before about mocker. Atzmus is not a mocker. Everything comes from him, but he's not relates, it doesn't relate to those levels. It's beyond him. So you could say Atzmus chose to relate, but you can't say he fundamentally relates, meaning that he becomes defined by it. And in that sense, it remains in the sense of Leishanisi. Now, there's a lot to be said about this. I don't know how much I should elaborate. I just wanted to just touch upon it. Point being here is that the Rebbe Rashab answers the question that wants to point. Remember, the whole thing here is to come to say that everything is ayin, even the highest levels of oir. And to explain that, he brings out that explains Leishanisi. Because if oir was tefes mokim in atzmus, then there would be a shinui. The fact that the sun, just in the example, the sun is not impacted by the light, and the light is not impacted by its function, it's an impact. In other words, it impacts the earth, but is not impacted. That tells you it's completely removed. So essentially, Oyer therefore teaches us both things. Oyer could carry the power of Atzmus and create, but in turn does not impact Atzmus because it's only a reflection. And that's essentially the logical medium, or you could say the logical instrument God used to explain this paradox. That yes, I create you, but I always remain removed from you. And therefore, we have both sides. Atzmus is intact, he's not affected by us, and existence is in place because it's created by the light. So basically, Oyer is an example of achieving something without being impacted by it. That's in brief. And again, I'm not talking now about avodah. Avodah is what God wants that the avodah should be, and therefore in a saveh it has it's his desire, but that does not mean it changes him. It just means that's what Atzmus desired, and that's that.
It's hard to understand it.
Yes.
Because he said, בפנימיוס ועצמוס נגיע כביכול שיהיה אבוידו זו, להמשיך גילו שם הווי שזהו הכוונה המושרשת בעצמוס. So what does it
But
mean?
then continue
אינו
reading.
נתפס בזה.
Right. I'll tell you. Let me just say this. Let me say this. First of all, I want to make a big distinction because I know I brought that into the picture here. In truth, he's not talking here about Avodah B'chlal. Here he's talking about creation, the creation process. Like I mentioned many times, that when the creation process, it's Lifnei Tzimtzum is off limits, because Lifnei Tzimtzum Oyer would not allow for creation. Avodah changes the dynamics because Avodah allows us to reconnect. So in general, it's not smart, even though what I just did, as I usually would say, is not a smart thing to do. But I did it for a reason, because I wanted to explain the following. Because Avodah changes things. In other words, once you start bringing Avodah into the picture, Avodah allows us to transform the Tzimtzum. And once you transform the Tzimtzum, you have access to Lifnei Tzimtzum. But one second, let me just finish this before. Okay, so what I'm saying is like this. So as far as creation goes, it's very clear. Creation is bara l'kim is a shemayim v'sa'aretz. He created heaven and earth. Let's not talk about Avodah for a moment. How did he create heaven and earth? Did the creation impact God? The answer is absolutely not. He did it. How do we understand that? You know, when an artist paints an art, it impacts the artist. You can't say it doesn't have impact on him. He's invested in it. He's investing. It affects him. The answer is because Atzmus is beyond anything. He's not an artist. Atzmus is beyond everything. So how do we understand it? So the Eibishter created something called Oyer. That's why he created Oyer. He created Oyer for us to understand how something can give and not be impacted. Okay. So that way, the integrity of Atzmus is not impacted by creation. Fine. That we understand. The problem becomes when you start talking the kavanas Atzmus. The Eibishter wants now, did it b'tachtenim. We're not talking about the actual process of creation. We understand that God did not sweat and have to invest one energy. He didn't get tired after 6 days. I think we all can understand. Why? Because Atzmus is not a human being. When we say Vayechul HaShamayim, it's not because God got tired. It's because God stopped investing and lowering himself, so to speak, into creation. So there's no element of tiredness. As a matter of fact, someone once wrote to the Rebbe, what's the big thing of putting on a switch on Shabbos? There's no effort even. You touch a switch. It's not even a drop of effort. So the Rebbe responded, very interesting. He says, how little effort in putting a switch is even less effort that God invested when he created creation. Even the switch he didn't have to push. Atzmus is removed from it. So it's not about the effort. It's about involved in producing something. A malacha means you produce something. It's not how much work you put. You can carry a big, heavy piece of furniture inside your house, and you're not over on a isur havora. You carry a feather outside, and you're over on an isur. It's not about how much effort you put in. Anyway, it's an aside. My point is that we could all understand that the creation process did not expend any energy on God's behalf, on God's end, and it did not change anything. The challenge becomes, what about Avodah? Now that the reason God created the Sava Kodesh Baruch Hu, and we know he has Nachas Ruach Lefanai, we say Reich Necheach, Nachas Ruach Lefanai, Shenas Shamarti V'Nasar Etzeni, and we have all the different expressions, how God takes pleasure and has pain when we don't do a mitzvah. So how do you explain all of that? So that's why I pointed back to Vayikran Sav Ayin Hey. So the Mekubalim talk about this. Some say on lower levels in the Shtalshlus, God manifests in a way that he is affected Kavyachal. So when we do something, Midah Keneged Midah. But if you go to higher levels, no, there's completely no impact. So when it says in the Medrash, Im Tzadachta Matifol Bay, if you do kindness, if you do tzedek, righteousness, what impact does it have on him? It's talking about the higher level. And the lower level is where God relates to exist. Like you say, Nasa Adam, B'Tsalmeinu Kid Musenu. God has an image? No. On lower levels, he manifested. The famous disagreement between the Rambam and the Maharal. The Rambam says, Hu Hamada, Hu Yudeya, Hu Yudua. That God is one with his knowledge. Comes the Maharal and says, what knowledge? God is beyond das. Less machshava tfisa beklal. He can't be defined by das. Comes the tivuch. The Alter Rebbe brings it in the Haggadah, in second chapter in Tanya, and in other places. 4 places in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe brings this point that after the tzimtzum and after that, even the Arizal would explain, like he brings the Kabbalah Haramak, that the Rambam is talking about once God created Atzilus, so to speak. So you have das and who v'daite echad. But if you're talking about Atzmus before there's a Sfiris, Itaka doesn't have das. So the Maharal is talking about the higher level that the Rambam is talking about in Nishtalshlos. My point is, you could say the same thing with it, that the highest levels, God is completely beyond. In the lower levels, God relates. But obviously, Chassidus has a problem with that, because we want a connection all the way to the top. We don't just want a connection with Atzilus or Ak or Ishtalshlos. So there's a second opinion, Avedus HaKedesh, Meir Ibn Gabbai writes, the second opinion is that Avedet Seder Geveya, that it also is in Atzmos. And there's all kinds of explanations. So the Maimer I just pointed out in Tzav is saying, coming to reconcile. How do you reconcile? So it's not, the impact is not like the impact in Atzilus. That's why you have the concept of Yedeya or Yedua. There's way God relates to existence where there's, like you say, Shchinta begalusa. The Shchin is in Galus. Or it says, Kaloni Mereshi, Kaloni Bizreya. It says when a Jew is hurting, the Eibishter hurts. Ime anechi b'tzara. We hear all these expressions, that God is with us in our tzara. But then how do you explain Leishanisi? Ani Hashem Leishanisi. So the answer is that there are levels where God binds himself with us, and yes, he's with us in Golus. But can you say Atzmus is Begalusa? Or you say Shchinta Begalusa? So there's a level that is not completely removed from everything, and yet the Eibishter wants to relate. And since he wants to relate, he's there in a certain way, but he's not defined by it. And that's the best way we can understand it in Chassidus. The ultimate challenge is, how do we understand how Atzmus can be there and not be there at the same time? That's going to be very difficult. We can relate to something. If I'm there, if I'm with you in your pain, I'm with you in your pain, and that's that. I'm not with you. But I should be with you. And in some way, there's something that's beyond. The only way you can explain is that I want to be with you, but it doesn't shape or define me. I mean, there may be other words to use to explain. I don't really want to go into more than necessary because it's not so relevant to this piece here. Because here, as I said, he's talking about creation, not about Aveda. But I wanted to bring it because I knew it's going to come up. And if I don't bring it up, someone else is going to bring it up. So I just wanted to qualify and explain. If you look in Leitia Mishakel, if I recall correctly, do I have the mimer here? The Rebbe adds a line there that explains this a little deeper and further than what I just said, if I recall. Or maybe I just said what it says there. I'm not sure. But bottom line is, what he wants to say here is, let's not talk about, even if avoida affect, I don't say the word affects. I quoted the Sikha Shmois Chelik Vov. Lekutei Sichos in volume 6, Shmois. The second Sikha talks about Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu, and it says Nesava is not to fill any missing element. Because Nesava is God desired, that's all. There's no question why he desired, there's no why. Now, we don't relate to things like that because by us, everything has a why. If God wants the world, it means that he's missing something without it. And the answer is no, he's not. If you want to understand it better, I would suggest learning that Sikha, because there he says that there are things, Atzmus wanted something, desired, Nesava, and that's it. You are not filling a hole or any void. It's Atzmus wanted to be with you. And on his terms, it's not because he needs you. It's not because something's missing. That's what he wants, and that's that. And the true relationship with Atzmus is you have to recognize that at the end of the day, for anybody to come up and say, you know what, since I give nachas ruach to atzmus for my avodah, and since I'm Moshe Nefesh, and since I'm told that Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu, you know, when I do avodah, me and God become more relatable to each other. No, atzmus always remains atzmus. That's the key point. That's the main punchline I want to say. Ani Hashem Leishanisi is not just saying God is invulnerable Superman and nothing affects him. It's saying that atzmus is always going to be one God. And no matter how deep our connection is, you always have to recognize that God is not you. God has nachas from you. He chooses to relate to you. He gave you a life. And yes, there are levels in the shtalshus where he relates very directly with you. Kol ha-kerev v'sheina HaKadosh Baruch Hu kerev v'sheina kenegdei. Mahu chanun afata chanun. We have plenty of areas. Look, we're going to say soon in Yom Kippur, the Kiyanu Amecha. You ever think, we say both expressions. Or we say Avinu Malkeinu. Is he a father or is he a king? Is he a master or is he a father? A father and a son have a integral biological connection. In Tanya, he says, Chelik elikam mal mamish, like a ben from Moyech ha'av. A king and a subject don't have a biological connection. They're very distant. So which one is it? Are we aim kabonim or aim kavodim? The answer is both. That we have in areas we have a relationship with the Eibishter, like a ben and an av, and there's areas we need to know God is beyond you. So the concept ultimately of Ani Hashem Leishanisi is simply really saying this: you are not God. God, in his mysterious ways, is not impacted even by the things he wants and even by the things he does. And that's important to know. We're not trying to make God perfect. That's not the point here. It's not like I said, it's not Superman. It's trying to explain that there's a dimension of God that you want in your life that is not about you. It's completely atzmus on atzmus terms. And if you want, like he said to Moshe Rabbeinu, what you cannot see me and live. What did he mean? What did Eibishter mean? Because if you see me, then it's you seeing me. It's not me. It's on your terms to some extent. You want me, you need to give up yourself. And the true understanding of atzmus on atzmus terms is not saying he doesn't want Aveda. Of course he wants our Aveda. But he wants you to know you're Aveda for atzmus. It's not Aveda for someone that you have a relationship with. And now you could say, you know what? I did a mitzvah for you. Now you owe me something. Yes, that's true in the levels of schar and einish. That's in the levels of shtalshlus. When the Alter Rebbe said, Mili b'shamayim, v'im chalecha fatzti, I don't want Gan Eden, Tachten, Gan Eden, Elam Haba, I want atzmus. What did he mean? He meant, I don't want a relationship with you as you relate to us. You know, Gan Eden, there's a lot of nanim b'ziva shchina, schar. Now, when he says, what's the beginning of Pirkei Avos, they should be al tehei kavodimamishamshinas as what's the lashon amishamshim as al tehei kavodim amishamshin al manas lekabel pras asarav or shaloy al manas lekabel pras or manas shaloy lekabel pras. The two different. The point is, why do we need that? Why can't I say that I will do aveda not shalei lishma? Why do I work for my boss? Because I want to get paid. Why do I have a relationship with someone? You give me, I give you. Why does it have to be unconditional? I understand it's very romantic and very noble to be unconditional. But what's the inyan in it? The inyan is because if you want God on God's terms, then it can't be on your conditions. You know, I heard once Zalman Gerari, his father was named Rav Nosson Gerari. Frierdiker Rebbe, he served as a secretary to the Frierdiker Rebbe from time to time in Poland. He was called in whenever the Frierdiker Rebbe needed a secretary to, how shall I put it, to be a little tough. So Frierdiker Rebbe at the time needed to eat a certain time. The doctors were very careful. Frierdiker Rebbe was...
Zalman or Rab Nosson?
Rab Nosson, Zalman's father, Rab Nosson. So he was called in to basically make sure the Frierdiker Rebbe takes care of himself. So he brought in a cup of tea and a biscuit, a kichel, and put it down on the table of Frierdiker Rebbe. Came back an hour later, and it's still sitting there. It got cold, untouched. So he tells the Frierdiker Rebbe, he says, to the Rebbe, you have to speak in the language of Torah. He says, that's all he said. The pasuk, you have to keep yourself healthy. It says, you have to be very careful with your health. And the Frierdiker Rebbe responded, he said to him, and you never heard about iskafia? Iskafia means, of course, refraining from indulging. So he responds to the Rebbe, he says, das ist für the Soldaten, nicht für den Melech. He says, iskafia is for the soldiers, not for the king. That's what he tells the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe responds, sie darfen und der will. They need iskafia. And this one, the king, wants iskafia. You hear the word? So we need iskafia because we're people who are indulgent people. So we need to tame ourselves and we need to discipline ourselves. So we refrain. That's the avodah of iskafia. A Rebbe doesn't need iskafia. But he has no yetzer hara for anything. What does he need iskafia? He says, but he wants it. Think about that. In other words, why does he want it? For what purpose? Why can't he might as well enjoy it since it's all kedusha? Because he wants the relationship with the Eibishter on the Eibishter's terms, not on his. So he doesn't want even one drop of taste. The Alter Rebbe was not saying Gan Eden and Elam Haba most people would give their lives for. The Alter Rebbe is dismissing the whole thing. He doesn't want Gan Eden and Elam Haba. Why? He doesn't want Giluyim. He doesn't want a relationship with God that relates to him. He wants a relationship with God that relates only to Atzmos. I'm ready just to be one with you. I have no interest or gain at all. Now, can we hold on this level? The Rebbe once said, Yutes Kisov, Tavshin Tezayin. He said, why we told the story of the Alter Rebbe? It's a level that, who could hold by such a level? The Rambam says, La'elim Yasek Adam B'Teireh Mitzvahs in Gemara. The Rambam Paskins, La'elim Yasek Adam B'Teireh Mitzvahs, Shalei L'Shma, Shalei L'Shma, M'teich Shalei L'Shma, Ba L'Shma. La'elam, that's the way we work. You tell a child, I'll give you a candy if you learn Torah. You tell an adult, I'll give you schar, ruchni, gashmi, whatever, covet. You get Gan Eden, Elam Haba. So that's the Seder. So why are we told the story about the Alter Rebbe? You know, the Rebbe answered. I think it's on a tape. I think it's Yutas Kislev Tezayin, if I recall. I heard it. The Rebbe says, very interesting answer. He doesn't even answer specifically. He says, Aber azeh hat man uns aufgehodet, am Medaf suchen de hechste madreges. Rebbe said, that's how we were educated. We have to always seek the highest levels. In other words, even though it's true the Alter Rebbe was unique, but we have to always seek. But I want to bring it back here. The idea of being able to shed even a shred of anything, because Ani Hashem Leishanisi is not trying to make God remove from us. It's trying to teach us how to have a relationship with God on God's terms alone. So by saying Oyed is only Ha'ara, it's not, most people read it, they say, okay, you know what? What's this whole thing about? All I'm getting is Ha'ara at the end of the day. I want Atzmos. After everything, all this tzaddis and all these challenges and all our Vedas, Sachakla, I'm getting Ha'ara that says here, Ein et tefes klal u'klal. It's like, so what? That's what it's all about. But if you think about it from a point of view of really the highest level, that's exactly the highest level. To get that you're not gaining anything, all you have is Atzmus and there's no other element. Because Ha'ara is only a reflection. And that's how you get Atzmus when you accept that. So that's really the point here. It's to have a full experience of Atzmus without any diluted elements of self. Now, it's hard for a yesh to accept that. That's why we can't jump to this level right away. That's exactly why we need Ha'ara and Oyed, why we need Asiya, and then we need Yetzirah, and then Bria, and Atzilus, because we need to relate to it. There's no way we can jump to such a level where there's no you. First, you need to be an existent entity. That's why there was the Tzimtzum. We need first to have an independent consciousness. That independent consciousness slowly says, okay, you know what? I'm not going to just be selfish me. I want a relationship with God, but it's still on our terms. And I have benefits, and you have retirement benefits, and you have gains, and you have an Elam Habit to look forward to, and a Gan Eden. A lot of great things. A beautiful life on earth. You do mitzvahs, God blesses you, etc. You slowly climb and you come to a point, 1 second. I want more than that. Okay, so they give you another set of rewards. Then you come to realize, like Avram Avinu came to realize, it's the other way around. The greatest reward is no reward. The greatest reward is when I no longer am an entity here. I want to be once side by side with Atzmos. You want to be side by side with me? You got to give up Elam Haba and Gan Eden, because all that, not because they're not good levels, but all that is not Atzmos. Now, the interesting twist here is that once you get Atzmos, you get everything, obviously. Anon Nesiv Malka, as the Rebbe brings, famous medrash, that everybody looked for. This one wanted this minister. That one says, no, I want to sit with the king. I'm only with the king. Once you have that, you already get everything. But it cannot be calculated.
If you're doing it to get everything, then you don't reach Atzmos.
Exactly. That's the twist. That bittul can't be, but there's no tricks here. It's a true bittul, but in turn, yes. Because remember, the whole Atzmos created Hishtalshelus too. So Hishtalshelus is infused with Atzmos as well. However, this is the real bottom line, what he is coming to teach us now. We haven't even gotten to the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, how the Yesh HaNivra sees and interprets ayin. He's explaining here how Atzmos, how Yesh HaMiti interprets ayin. And basically, so it's really, it really turns everything over. When you learn, 1 second, when you learn this, initially you think, you know what? I'm nothing. I'm worthless. I'm not Tefes Mokim. Even if Etzem Ha'ed is not Tefes Mokim, you can imagine the Yesh is not Tefes Mokim. And yet, the opposite is true. Because what we're getting here is a taste of true Atzmos. Without, now just to give you for the record, there were Mekubolim, Kabbalists, true Mekubolim, who said you can have a relationship with the Eibishter in a much more personal way, where you don't give up your identity, but you're not going to get Atzmos. You'll get God on your terms. Fine. There is that approach. But Chassidus did not, Alter Rebbe decided to go for Imcha Lecha Fatz. He wants Imcha. No, not Imcha. He wants...
A new question that you said before, as it was in other places the Rebbe said, since we were told about this, that means that we are having a shaykhs to that.
Yeah.
The Rebbe is saying it.
In the later Sichos, especially in Tov Nun and Nun Aleph, if you look at Rosh Hashanah Nun Aleph, the Rebbe says, after all the years of Aveda, we're getting closer. Remember, the Mesiras Nefesh, when Jews died for their faith, that was like the ultimate Bitla Metzias. Mesiras Nefesh like that, you get very close to Atzmos, because you gave up everything. You gave up your life, your children, your comforts. These things are part of our legacy, are part of our history, are part of our heritage, I should say. Part of our heritage. I want to just share another story, a nice Gishmaka story that captured. I've mentioned this, I think, a number of times. When the Tzemach Tzedek had a chassid, I forgot his name. He was a real chassid, worked hard on himself. He used to sleep on a bench very often because he wanted to break his body, his material body, so he could. That was the expression. He should be more refined and be able to contain and relate to Chassidus in a better way. Now, as the years rolled on, he got older and he became sick. And when he was already in the last days of his life, or maybe the last day, he said the following, that if my sleeping on a bench caused me to die one day earlier, so I can't put on film one more day, it wasn't worth it. So all the work I did to break my body in order to appreciate Chassidus, Alakus, was not worth it if I can't put on film one more day. And he passed away a little later. Tzemach Tzedek said, when he heard that, he said the following. He said, it takes someone who slept on a bench for 20 years to have such a hergish, to recognize that. You hear? So the mere fact that he said he's missing the film was because he slept on the bench. My point is, you can't fool. There are no tricks to the trade. It's not like, you know what, if I sleep on a bench 20 years, my reward is I'm going to get Atzmus. If you do it that way, it's not going to work. It has to be real. Once you give yourself up willingly, what you get, I wouldn't even say get in return. That is the experience. You're now allowed, the Kotzker Rebbe once said, where is God? Wherever you let him in. You've let Atzmus into your life. As soon as you have your agenda, you have a lakus, but to say you have Atzmus in your life, it doesn't have where to manifest because you're you. And the you and the Atzmus are, I'm not saying Atzmus is everywhere. I'm not talking about from Atzmus' point of view, from our point of view. So frankly, the irony here is the more you recognize how Atzmus is beyond us, the more you can ultimately experience Atzmus.
Rabbi Jacobson, I still don't see how this whole long discussion here, fascinating discussion, answers the apparent logic or whatever that Aninu Lo Shanisi, that Etzem, Atzmus, even with our Tachas a Bittul, even at the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, Mashiach Tzidkenu, we said that Atzmus doesn't change. It's not impacted and it doesn't extend. So even with this Tachas a Bittul, and how can that allow you to be with God, a God that doesn't change and is not affected one way? It doesn't affect and doesn't affect. It's way higher than affect. So how could even the Tachas Bittul won't change that fact?
It doesn't have to change. Who says it has to change? Why are you expecting anything?
I'm not expecting.
Why are you expecting anything from Atzmus?
No, you said I'm not, because to have a relationship with God, Atzmus, a relationship implies at least a one-way street and probably a two-way street, some type of impact and effect. Either way, if it's not affecting anything, there's no relationship. If there's no change, you don't have a relationship.
First of all, it's relationship in your terms, not on God's terms. What you just said, the fact that you say a relationship has to impact both is a human construct, not a.
No, I said one way.
That's number one. That's number one. Number two, what do you mean? All the years that you do avodah, and God wants you to do, is you're building a relationship with God on the levels that you can build. And with Atzmus, it's not going to be called a relationship. It's going to be called Atzmus. That's all. That's exactly why you can't reach there without going through all the steps. You can't go there because exactly what you just said, because you cannot relate to Atzmus unless you go through all those levels. If a person indeed goes through the levels in their avodah to the best of their ability, then they will have that relationship, and they won't have that question that you're asking. So, because that question is only a question based on logic that we understand.
I mean, the thing here is the Atzmus. Why don't we say that we can have a relationship with the painter, the painter, the painted object can have a relationship with the painter. God is way above. His Atzmus is way above the fact that he manifests himself as a painter or as a this, as a that. Those are all manifestations that doesn't touch his etzem. A guy that you can relate to a person as a lawyer, but that doesn't mean that you can relate to him as a father or as your best friend or any other way. Meaning that you have a relationship with him in a certain way. God Atzmus doesn't change. Why we could say even if you go through all those steps.
We're going in circles here. What I think you're missing here is I don't think you relate to true bittul b'tachlis. Your bittul is always with a condition. I want a relationship with Atzmus, and Atzmus has to change for this relationship. You have to knock that out if you want to enter into the domain of Atzmus. Moshe Rabbeinu could not go there. You cannot see me, and that's it. You want to see me? It's over with. So bottom line is what is difficult for an individual to relate to is total bittul completely. You think that total bittul without something to gain is impossible. It's not true, because Atzmus is real and created us. We have the capacity to completely nullify everything, including even this conversation about a relationship and shanisi and so on, and come to absorb an Atzmus that is beyond it all. And it doesn't bother us because we don't have questions. and we just completely, like the Alter Rebbe said, I don't want anything. That's all I want to have with. And there's nothing in return. This idea
the idea that nothing in return, I'm saying that even if a person is at such a level where you don't want anything in return, you want to give yourself, your life, everything just for God. You're not expecting anything. Gan Eden,
That's it.
anything.
So
But I'm trying to say that even that level, we can't get around the fact that Ani Lo Shnisi, God is not affected. He doesn't change.
Of course you can get around the fact. If you really had that bittul, that would not make a difference if Shanisi or Le Shanisi. Why would it make a difference?
Because how can you have an impact if I give my life to
Okay,
God?
there you go. You see, so you didn't give yourself completely away. You have one little thing that you want. That there
I
should
don't
be
want anything. I don't want anything. You mean you're wanting God to benefit from my Mesiras Nefesh? You mean that's what you're saying?
Total to bittul to atzmus without even asking the question of Shanisi or Le Shanisi. Why can't you accept that?
Because Lo Shanisi means, it seems to imply that no
It
matter.
means nothing. It means that atzmus is not subject to change. That's all it means. And you need him to change to feel better. Why?
No, not. Why do I need him to change? Because
Yeah.
Because.
Tell me. Why do you need him to change? Yeah.
Why not change? To be impacted.
Why do you need him to be impacted? Why?
Because then, therefore, how am I having? How would you
words,
say
you
that I
have
can
some
have a
interest.
relationship with Atzmus if he's not impacted whatsoever? Even
So
one
in other
bit?
words, you want something, and that's what you have to. That's not possible with atzmus.
No, I don't. I'm not care. I'm talking about me at all. I'm saying logically speaking.
Who
Logically
cares if he's
speaking, something that is
impacted?
not. It doesn't
If it's
change.
No, if it's total bittul, it should not matter whether he's impacted or not. It makes no difference because even the word impact means nothing. Impact is a creation. Shinui is a creation. Atzmus is not a creation. Impact and shinui means nothing in atzmus. It has no meaning. It only has meaning to you.
We want to rely on Chassidus to explain to us whether we can, even if we don't expecting anything or want anything, that there in emes, in truth, does it reach? Can we are a voter or whatever reach
as soon
a
as
level?
you have that interest, you're ready not atzmus because you want impact.
I want to. My interest is to know the truth, nothing else.
The truth is that God has no relationship to impact or shinui. It's all created concepts.
Oh, that's what I want. That's what I wanted to hear. So therefore, it's not impacted by anything. So then there's no relationship at all.
Maybe that's the ultimate relationship. Who defined what a relationship is? That's also your definition.
What do you mean the ultimate? That's maybe the ultimate relationship.
Defining everything. Maybe all that definition has to be. Maybe you have to drop all your definitions and all your givens and assumptions.
Oh, so now that's a different answer. You're saying what we think of as a relationship might not be what happens when a person is totally bittul and can somehow merge with atzmus or have some
exactly what I was saying till now. I was saying this till now. That's why, but you can't get there. Humans like us need to go through the levels of relationship on our terms as well. I did say that as well. You can't ignore that. This, what I'm describing, is the ultimate. You have to go through levels that you do identify with impact and shinui and relationship, because you can never enter there if you don't go through the other levels.
And Chassidus is telling us, and the Rebbe here in Ayin Beis is telling us that we can ultimately enter the realm of Atzmus. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah, to Avodah, and there is one more thing, Simon, you said it before, because this is what he wants. This other. Otherwise, with all of the bittul, everything that you said, we would not have a relationship with Atzmus, because it's Atzmus. But this is what Atzmus wants.
But Rabbi Teitel, even if he wants it, even God wants it on an ultimate level, don't we have the fact that we're taught in Chassidus and Torah that he doesn't change at all? There's no impact anyway. So therefore, even if he wants it, either what we learn that there, in some level, it has to be an impact if he wants it.
No.
This is the thing that we cannot understand, that he wants it, and we're saying that Eino nitmas b'zeh. The Alter Rebbe said, of a tithe.
Would you two please take it on the side? Would you please take it on the side, Rabbi Gold, Rabbi Tactel? Would you please?
So this is what's called learning, and we're discussion in a class. Now you do this, sometimes you speak and we all listen to you, and I'm happy to listen to you, and I enjoy listening to your thoughts. Why do you always try to cut off our discussion when it's negaya to our subject that we're learning? If it's irrelevant, it's not negaya, I could understand. But it's negaya. You've done this twice to me, and I don't know why you're doing that.
Right. If it's even if it's no Gaya,
Yes.
I just assume you take it on the side because I want to hear what Rabbi Jacobson. So I appreciate that you all have a purpose and an interest, but that's not why I'm here. Perhaps the other people want to listen to what you have to say. Why don't you ask everyone?
Okay. Take a vote.
Look, let me be the referee here. There are times I cut you guys off because I feel it is a different topic altogether. And I think, and at times everybody has the right to ask. In this context, I think it is part of the topic. I think we've said enough. I mean, we could talk more about it, but what I would suggest at this point is absorb what we said, and we could always come back to it. It's all right. I think I said what I needed to say. Look, I am not suggesting it's going to be easy to swallow, but you have to remember, there's a very deep relationship between the avodah that you do that does relate to you with the avodah that you do that's beyond relating to you. That's why you need mamala and seviv and atzmus. Remember, the same atzmus that says, come up to my highest levels, also says, work on your avodah day by day. Every day we say in Shema. We don't start b'chol ma'oidcha, right? We start b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol ma'odecha. Why? Why don't we just jump to ma'oid? Because you can't get to ma'oid if you don't get to through levavcha and nafshecha. First, you have to work on your terms. Whatever it is, as soon as you move from selfish ego to in some way serving God, even a small little act, tzedakah, a kind word, a gesture, whatever it may be, Torah, tefillah, gemilas chasadim, you're already on your way. Everything matters. It's not like, oh, the only thing counts is up by atzmus lifnei atzimtzum. That is like, that we're talking is the ultimate. What we're talking about right now is you need to realize that every piece of avodah we do matters. Now, you could ask the question, what about when I do a little tzedakah? Does it matter to atzmus? The answer is yes, he chose that it matters. Whether it impacts him or not is not relevant because it's not our domain. We're not atzmus. He chose whatever reason. Maybe there is no reason, as we said. The point of the matter is that on lower levels, God says to you, yes, you impact me directly. When you're in Golus, I'm in Golus. When you're in pain, I'm in pain. When you start studying Chassidus deeper and you go to the higher levels, like I said, many Kabbalists give up when you go too high. They say Atzmus there is off limits. The Ramak, others say Atzmus is never going to be accessible. That's beyond us. And that's it. And you just have to come to terms with that. And what do you relate to? You relate to Atzmus, to God rather, as he is in Atzilus, as Mahu Chanon, Afata Chanon. It is Chassidus Chabad particularly that went, especially as Chassidus developed through the Rabbeim, that went for everything. But then there's a dilemma when you go for everything, because now you're dealing with Atzmus on Atzmus terms. There's a reason those Mukabalim didn't go there, because they felt once it's Atzmus, there's nothing that we can relate to. And the Alter Rebbe came to Mechadish with Oyer and so on. By the mere fact that you know you can't relate to him, that allows you in. But as soon as you begin to bring in one tinge of your need or even your understanding, then you're not going to have him. So it really comes down to you get what you ask for. If you want a God that is going to make sense to you, you're going to get a God on those terms. If you want a God that is atzmus and without anything else, yes, you're going to have to give up your definitions of relationship and of impact and of shinui and gain, which goes against the grain of most people's nature. Most people say, you know what? I'm ready to do Aveda L'Shma because of that, I'm going to get some schar. Where if I do Shalei L'Shma, I don't get that schar. That's very nice. But that ultimately is also not real L'Shma. So the point is, what Hashem said to Moshe, no one can see me and live. He was saying it to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the person who was Makabel Torah. We're talking about the highest level a human being ever reached, which is to speak to God face to face. You know, there's nothing higher than Moshe Rabbeinu. And yet Hashem says it, and you know what? God was telling him this secret. Like I interpret from the Ponim Yofis and the Rebbe brings that when Hashem said, "You can see my face by not looking," that's the key. The not looking. Now, I don't think anybody here, at least that I know of, has reached anything close to that level. If we just gave up one taiva today, I find that as an accomplishment. So we have to be careful in general where we're at. We're not holding by that madrega yet. But I'll tell you this, that we all can get a taste of it. And it's really, ultimately, yes, it's when you're truly in love and when you truly don't even sense yourself. You can't even talk about it. You know, when you're really in passion and love, do you even ask yourself, what am I gaining from this? Or what is happening to the person I love? No, you lose all sense of consciousness. You lose all sense of awareness. Awareness and consciousness themselves are already giluyim. Atzmus is beyond consciousness, beyond awareness. The reason I'm elaborating is because anything that's being said is not atzmus. It's all how you think atzmus is. Atzmus is something that you cannot, not in no way that through our consciousness we can ever relate to. So you'll say, so what kind of relationship? You know what? It's a different type of relationship. Exactly. It's not a human relationship. It's not a relationship as you understand it. It's being absorbed in the etzem of everything, of bilta mitzias nimtza. And only because God said, yes, I have a desire for having that. If you do what you have to do, you will have that. And that's that. And don't ask the question, what's happening to me? Because I'm not you. You're never going to know what's happening to me because nothing's happening to me. And the whole idea of happening is a question. What does it even mean? If there's no shinui, what happened by Bereshis Bara Elokim? Is there a world? There's no world. You know, when you want to go into the depth of Chassidus, Chassidus says there's no existence from the eyes of Atzmus. That doesn't mean there's an illusion. So how do you explain that? So you have to explain that Atzmus is such a kol yachol that kashem yicholte lehoyer, yicholte shelo lehoyer. So by him, existence and non-existence are equal. Can we even understand that? I can't even wrap my head around understanding what means a second before Bereshis Bara Elokim, let alone understanding that type of reality. So bottom line is, the more you learn Chassidus, the more you stand in awe of Atzmus. You realize, oh man, this is completely beyond. And when you have the right bittul, that should be very satisfying. If you feel like, no, I want to get it, you may never get it. Anyway, that's just some words of encouragement.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you.
I think, you know, when I think when we learn Chassidus and you learn about a Rebbe, you come to, I don't know if we ever, I think every one of us has probably a moment where you were completely bottled, you weren't even aware that you're bottled, if you know what I'm saying. It's not like you deliberately said, okay, I'm going to be bottled now to the Rebbe's Ratzon or to the Kavan El Yena. That's a dargeh. But there comes a point where you're completely in the zone and it is what it is, and that's it. And it's like absolutely nothing else is relevant. But the interesting paradox is you have to go through b'chol levavcha chol nafshecha. You got to go through the levels where you do relate. Because remember, in God's mysterious ways, and this may throw you for a loop, even when you do avodah, let's say in Asiya or Yetzirah Bria, where there is a commensurate reciprocal relationship. You know, you do chesed, l'cha Hashem tzedakah, God does tzedakah to you. You know, we have this all the time. You do this, God, there's a reciprocal. That in some way is part of God's Atzmus mysterious plan that is embedding into existence a type of reciprocal cause and effect. Even though Atzmus is beyond cause and effect and change, he's still embedding it. So in some mysterious way, when you do that, you are climbing the ladder to Atzmus. Because remember, nothing is outside of Atzmus. Even, like you can ask this question, what about the levels that do have Shinui? Atzmus created Shinui. So it doesn't make a Shinui in him. But does he created Shinui? He created the change. For example, Erev Shabbos to Shabbos is a Shinui. It's a different time, different mitzvahs, and different situation. So how does Leisha Nisi look at Shinui? Anyway, I'll give you some homework. Think about, wrap your head around that one. So you have to say that from the perspective of Atzmus, even shinui is not shinui, because shinui is a particular role, like saying Atzmus created Chochmah, but he's not Chochmah. You see what I'm saying? So shinui itself is a necessary component in existence. We have to have shinui. That's what makes us, time and space is necessary. That's shinui. This space, this time, yesterday, today, tomorrow, shinui mokim, shinui zman, and there's halachas about it. It's not just a physical, scientific element. There's halachas about shinui mokim and shinui zman. So you have to say that shinui is also part of this whole existence. That Leisha Nisi is created shinui, and the shinui also is part of his so-called beyond. Anyway, it's a lot to to think about, a lot to talk about, but you know what? It's a gift. With Achsis, we wouldn't even be talking about this, let alone getting there, right? No. I think when you saw the Rebbe, and you saw, I'm sure the other Rabbeim, I always felt that besides the Rebbe's holiness and charisma and all that, and scholarship, you always felt that a person is there, but he's not there. It's not about him. It was always, you're just here to channel something greater than you are. And that's what the Rebbe was. There was someone will say to you the question, Rabbi Yael used to tell us, there was this rebel in the Bronx, I think. He was known to be a charlatan. People would come to him, he'd give blessings, but you had to pay. So someone once came to him and said, I went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe for a bracha, and he didn't give it to me. So he said to him, did you pay him? He said, I offered. Didn't help. So he said, pay him more. He says, I don't think it's going to help. He says, how are you so sure it's going to help? He says, I'm a Rebbe, I know. This charlatan says, I'm a Rebbe. He could not conceive of a concept of someone giving a bracha without pay. So the analogy they give is with a cow. The cow in one of the shtetlach was a cow. So every day the cow would get water. They give cow water. But the cow was especially happy, when? After Shabbos. Because Sunday morning, the maid would put out the water that was washed from all the pots of Shabbos. So it had all the fatty stuff from cholent and kishke and kugel and whatever. So the cow knew Sunday morning that it's always getting the best water, the richest water. One week, there was a different maid, so she threw out the water, and she didn't give it to the cow. So the cow refused to give milk the rest of the week. It was angry. And it's a mashal. And when they asked the cow, what's the matter? She says, unless you fire this maid, I am not going to continue to give milk. Why? She said, because the maid could not stand that I'm drinking the water, and the maid drank it herself. In other words, we always relate to things based on our terms. We think if the water is not there, probably she drank it. So in other words, the idea that we always identify things on our terms, the idea of completely eliminating your terms and being able to see something that is, completely not me, not a drop, is not easy for most people. It's a real bittul. It's a real ayin. That's exactly the word, ayin. It's like, why would I want ayin? I want yesh. Okay, I want a nicer yesh, a refined yesh, a little ayin too stuck in because it makes it nice. But the idea that you want absolute to be, you want to completely disappear? We're talking not not talking about a dysfunctional person who has low self-esteem and wants to annihilate themselves. I'm talking about someone who has a full identity. Why would they want that? Because when you come to realize these are higher levels, and that's that. Now, the question is how high? Every one of us has to work on that. Oh, it's 11:42. Wow. I think this is great material to go into Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So let me just tie up the knots here. Let's just see, where do we stop here? Okay, so he said that there's Loisha Nisi. Why? Everything was created, but it was created through Oir. I'm going to stop here because it's a good place to stop. There's more to say, but we'll talk about it.
שכוח חבר'ה.
Okay, so middle of page 1151. And to sum up one line, I would say, if you had a choice to find out a friend, a spouse, a rebbe, anybody, and you have a good relationship with them, and it works well, reciprocal, and you have two options now. I will show you that there's a whole dimension to them that you don't even have a clue about. And it'll upset your whole relationship. Why? Because you suddenly realize, I had a relationship with them, but there's a whole part of them I don't even know. Would you rather know that? Or would you rather just stay where you are and say, you know what? I'm very comfortable with my relationship with them. I don't need. Someone makes silence there. What's going on? Yeah. Or you say, I don't want to upset my relationship. Everything's going well. Why do I need to know about new mysteries and new mystique? I think that's a good litmus test for people. Some people would rather live where they are and everything's going well than to find out there's a whole new serious mistake. I don't mean negative things, obviously. I mean a higher level of potential. So, okay, so let's conclude with this page, middle of page 1151. We'll continue tomorrow at 9:30. It was great.